and that is item F1, Economic Development Strategic Plan Situation Assessment.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm just getting everything set up here, and I'll get this show on the road.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So Ryan Kintz here, assistant to the city manager, here to present the situation assessment item to you this evening. I'm also joined this evening by our consultants, Carraggio Group. They're attending virtually. We have Chris Harder here with us and Matthew Landkamer virtually up on the screen. So I'm here to introduce the product of the first phase of the development of the city's economic development strategic plan. So this is a culmination of many months of work that included key stakeholders and community members throughout the city of Goleta. So kudos and thanks to the community for really working hard to help us produce this foundational document for our economic development strategic plan. So this situation assessment is similar to a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, and that's what we're presenting to you tonight. So just want to make a quick note, being mindful of the agenda. The presentation that you're going to see tonight is just slightly different than what's in the packet, and that's because we removed some of the items and put them into appendices, mostly some of the comments that we received during the stakeholder process. So we wanted to be mindful of this evening. We know it's going to be a long night, so we just moved those to the appendices. They're still in the report. They're just there for reference. And then, so for the development of this document that's presented to you tonight, staff and consultant, we prioritized stakeholder engagement, gathering input from residents and key leaders in the community. We conducted research and analysis. We also identified visitor profiles and potential visitor surveys that are specific to the Goleta community. And we also developed the draft version of this situation assessment, which is really a comprehensive strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, as I mentioned. And this document really serves as the foundational document and the current context for the planning and developing of our economic development strategic plan, which we're going to move into in the new year. We're really excited about that. So as I mentioned, we have Carraggio Group here with us tonight. They'll be assisting the city with the development of the plan, and they've been a major key stakeholder and partner in the development of this situation assessment. We couldn't have done it without them. And so tonight they're going to facilitate this discussion to explore and clarify the themes that you see in the situation assessment. And then they're going to lead a conversation with us about the implications of these findings and help us set the stage for moving into the development of the plan, which is really where the rubber hits the road. Tonight we're asking the council to receive the presentation and the report, and then we really want your feedback. This is an engagement opportunity with the council to just give us some of your thoughts and ask any questions that you may have, and just make sure that we're on the right track. And then the core planning team, as I mentioned, is a team that consists of key leaders throughout the Goleta community. And they're really going to be the ones that draft the plan based off of these foundational themes that are in our situation assessment. And I just want to name some of those, or all of them, so that the council is aware of who these community members are that are going to be drafting this plan for us. So Kathy Janega Dykes from the Visit Santa Barbara organization, CEO and president. Kristen Miller, president CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. Jacqueline Inda from the Hispanic Chamber. Lori Goodman from Isla Vista Youth Projects. Bruce Stensley from the Economic Development Collaboration. Francois Dijon from Hayes Commercial. Mark Ingalls from the Camino Real Marketplace, and then Kathy Odell from the Women's Economic Ventures. Those are the community members. We also have staff who's going to be on the core planning team, and that consists of the city manager, Robert Nisbet, myself, assistant to the city manager, Jaime Valdez, our neighborhood services director, Luke Rio, our finance director, and Shannon Kern, management analyst in the city manager's department. So as you can see, we have a large group that's going to be drafting this plan. And it was challenging to come up with that group because we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, but we want the right cooks. And that's what staff and consultants spent time on, getting that right group together. So we asked tonight that we get the questions from you at the end. It's a long presentation, as I mentioned. We did shorten it. So if you could bring your questions at the end, that'd be greatly appreciated. And now I'd like to introduce Chris Harder and Matthew Landkamer to present the situation assessment. I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. I am going to share a document on the screen here. And hopefully, maybe it's just a thumbs up. Everyone can see that, or council can see that. Perfect. As Ryan mentioned, what we're going to do today, you should have the lengthy report as well as a longer presentation. The report itself with appendices is 110 pages. We will not be presenting on 110 pages today. What we're intending to do is kind of hit the key highlights around what you'll see is 10 major themes that came out of our, what we call our Get Clear phase. And then certainly want to open it up for questions or comments or discussion after that. Before we jump into the themes, however, want to just kind of frame where this sits in the larger project. Ryan actually did a wonderful job of that, so I can speed through this. But as you can see on the screen, the Get Clear phase is all about us listening and learning and understanding kind of the dynamics on the ground as it relates to Goleta's economy, livability, and just broader economic development. We also partnered on this Get Clear phase with a firm called Destination Analysts, who did some very specific tourism and hospitality related analysis, both a potential visitor analysis as well as a existing visitor and tourism impact analysis. Their work and findings are referenced in the report and helped us develop the themes. In addition, we also did local and regional economic analysis, more of a quantitative look at the economy. We did some program benchmarking where we looked at 5 different communities in California, similar size, similar kind of dynamics, similar population, and looked at their specific programs to see what we could learn or what potentially Goleta could look at when we get into the strategic planning phase. But we did a ton of stakeholder outreach. So we had a survey, I think close to 400 total respondents and completed that survey. We did interviews up to, I think, about 15 individuals, and then we held 3 different focus groups. All of that was input into the situation assessment, which you're going to see at a high level today. Why we do this is we want to make sure that when we actually start the development of the economic development strategic plan, we have a foundation from which to build from. We have shared assumptions and shared information. So we're going to really be using this situation assessment and the 10 themes you see to help drive the planning process. And you can see on that Get Focused phase, we'll be meeting over 6 half-day sessions, working on things like defining Goleta's competitive position, helping to think about and develop a long-term economic vision, but then getting into the meat of a strategic plan, the priorities, the metrics, the initiatives and strategies. We will be, in addition to this core planning team, working with a broader, what we call advisory committee, a broader stakeholder group of around 25 to 30 to make sure as we go along the way, we get check-in and feedback. And we're also planning a resident and community forum to share kind of draft work of all this. And then the final phase of all this is we're going to be working with city staff in particular around implementation planning, making sure they have the right resources and best practices to actually make a plan like this actionable. So with that in mind, we're going to jump straight into the themes. Matthew's going to take my colleague the first five. I'll take the last five, and then we'll open it up for questions. A little bit about these themes. To show up as a theme, we really had to see kind of the sentiments consistent across our different input areas. So the data, the surveys, the conversations we had. So just because a person or a small group had an opinion doesn't necessarily mean it shows up as a theme. We really had to see it consistently throughout all our different input processes. The other thing, these themes are Correggio's interpretation of what we heard. They are not recommendations for what should show up in your strategic plan. Again, this is just a kind of baseline and a current state of where we think things stand. So I just want to make that clear as well. So with that, I am going to, these are the 10 themes. We're going to take one each individually, talk about some key insights and implications, and then point to some key data points along the way. And then, of course, answer your questions, take your comments towards the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew to kick this off.
Thanks, Chris. Go ahead and start with theme one. So in the interest of time, I think Chris and I are going to share each of these themes with you and share a couple of the insights and maybe share a chart or a graph or a word cloud that supports the theme. As Chris indicated, there's a lot of data behind all of this and a lot of quotes from the stakeholder outreach that we're not going to share with you tonight. But it is in the full report that I know you all have received. So the first theme, City of Goleta has the opportunity to align stakeholders and residents around a shared community-driven economic vision. Chris, if you advance to the next slide just for a second, when we asked folks what they'd like to see reflected in the economic vision, some of the words that really came up to the top, obviously sustainable was said the most, but also focused on local, environment, community, inclusive, equitable, innovative. Those kinds of ideas rose to the top. Chris, if you go back one. The top two desired economic development priorities are improved infrastructure and city or downtown beautification, followed by an increase in livable wage jobs and better support for small businesses. So these are things that the community is asking for, and it's really seems to be a prime time to get a community-based plan. I also want to note one of these implications here, or one of these insights, is that although the target audience was community development, economic development, and tourism stakeholders, the predominant respondent group was residents, despite repeated efforts to try to get those business groups to respond. The residents were very interested in responding to the survey. So there is a community interest in this that I want to highlight. Let's move on to the second one, Chris. Overwhelmingly, your stakeholders are worried about the rising cost of living, would like to see Goleta address housing and childcare availability and affordability. Just watching the last couple of hours of City Council meeting, obviously this is on your minds already. Heard these topics come up several times and be subject to some of your presentations as well. So we know this is on your minds. This definitely came up in our background research as well. Rising costs are a major concern. Lack of housing and childcare availability and affordability are among the top three challenges to your economic development stakeholders. It came up in almost every interview and focus group. Housing availability is an important economic outcome for every stakeholder group. Although we didn't offer affordable housing as an option for them to respond, this got entered in the other category so frequently that it came out very high. So even though we weren't prompting it unaided, as they say in the marketing world, this came up as an important theme. And there's some stats in there on the right-hand side about affordability, but the bottom line, nearly 40% of households in Goleta are unable or struggling to afford the average rent. So it's a difficult situation. We know you're already trying to address it, but as we think about economic development in Goleta, this is, of course, an important issue. Next slide, Chris. And just to highlight the challenges that folks brought up, availability and cost of housing, as I mentioned, was far and away the highest one, and limited access to affordable childcare came in at third. Those are intertwined economic realities. Let's look at theme 3. Investing in Goleta's infrastructure will be key to community livability, economic growth, and destination development. Respondents on the survey talked about infrastructure investment as the most important economic development activity, but your effectiveness was rated lower. This was the biggest gap between importance and effectiveness amongst the set. Chris, if you'd go to the next slide for a second so we can see that. Thank you. On the one at the left that's highlighted in yellow, infrastructure investment rated as really high, effectiveness rated middling at best. That's a big gap between what's important and what's real. If you go back, Chris, a few other things. Businesses see infrastructure as a challenge. This is things like broadband, high-speed internet, but also it has to do with transportation infrastructure, water, and things like that. So there's a lot of community concern about infrastructure and the limits that it places on economic growth. Let's go to theme 4. Focus on placemaking and downtown redevelopment is needed to help create a sense of place, enhance local amenities, and improve Goleta's visitor experience. This came up strongly from survey respondents. Some of them naming downtown beautification improvements as the second most important economic development outcome. The quality of some of your amenities was rated quite low. And this, of course, impacts quality of life for residents, but also quality of experience for visitors. The current lack of a city center or focal point for the city came up a lot. And there's some suggestion of redeveloping Old Town, both as a key to improving quality of life for residents, but also creating a sort of centralized visitor experience. Chris, if you go to the next slide for a second. So the data on this one, as mentioned, city or downtown beautification and improvements showed up as the second most important, 45% citing that. Okay, and theme 5. Goleta does not have a strong tourism identity and lacks the necessary support structures to position itself as a true visitor destination. This is my particular expertise on the project is the tourism side. And you're in a place where you're not quite there yet to be able to have that enough to sell on your own. And so developing that and laying the groundwork, we think, is probably one of the focal areas of this plan. Although it creates a huge amount of economic activity in Goleta, most of the people that destination analysts surveyed said that they weren't traveling to Goleta specifically. It was about a third, or about 3 in 10 said they were. The rest of the folks were there to visit another place. Most visitors primarily plan to spend time in Santa Barbara. That was about 40%, I believe, if memory serves. And there's a lack of identity as a destination that peer communities possess. We looked at a competitive set of California destinations, and Goleta came in as the lowest likelihood destination. And the top deterrents were, I never hear anything about it, and I don't know anything about it. So that lack of awareness, of brand awareness, is a challenge. And also, stakeholders rated the quality of tourism support structures as poor, highlighting a need for improved tourism funding, better support from tourism partners, investors, and stakeholders. Chris, next slide, please. This is the stats I was citing there, where Goleta, about 3 in 10 folks said they were there specifically to visit Goleta. 4 in 10 said they were there to visit Santa Barbara, and the rest other area destinations. Okay, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you for theme 6 and on.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. So theme 6, the business community in Goleta does not feel supported, especially small business owners and entrepreneurs. So our survey respondents describe Goleta's current ability to support local entrepreneurs, businesses, and industries more broadly as expensive, bureaucratic, limited, unknown, slow, and poor. Survey respondents are also unlikely to recommend Goleta as a place to do business. This was captured particularly in what we call a net promoter score. So I'll look at it here. I have a colleague, Sam, who can talk about this in more depth if you're interested. But this is a way to kind of gather sentiment of, do you promote a certain place, or sometimes we use this in your willingness to promote a place to work. In this case, it's a willingness to promote a place to do business. So you have more detractors than you do what we call promoters. So this is an area of potential focus when we get to the planning phase there. 28% of economic development stakeholders who responded to the survey, so this is kind of a narrower set of respondents, would like to see Goleta's economic development efforts result in better support for small business and entrepreneurs, with the perception of lacking support for small businesses, especially strong among entrepreneurs and business owners from historically disadvantaged communities. And finally, economic development stakeholders identified talent attraction and retention, tax rates and business costs, and government bureaucracy as the biggest challenges to operating a business in Goleta. And small business owners and entrepreneur survey respondents disproportionately perceive tax rates and business costs to be a key burden. Moving on to theme 7, the lack of industry diversification and middle wage jobs is a potential threat to Goleta's long-term economic resilience. So one of the things we looked at is called the Hatchman Index. It's at the county level, so take that with a grain of salt of how the data comes. But in short, Goleta is less diversified or Santa Barbara County is less diversified. So we're going to project that a little bit onto Goleta compared to other parts of California. Now, part of this could be this is capturing a fairly significant employer in UCSB, so that will skew it a little bit. But we know there's opportunities to diversify the economy and the industries that are growing in Goleta. This is just the Hatchman Index score. Again, I'm not going to get into all the details, but typically for a county level, we'd like to see that more around 40 to 60, not 18 or 19-ish there. We also don't want to see it too diversified, because there is the concept of having target industry clusters as well, and understanding that you're not going to be great in everything. So it's a bit of a balance that we go through. We'll have plenty of opportunities to discuss this when we get into the planning kind of phase of things. Many open-ended survey respondents suggest that they believe city leaders primarily associate economic growth with tourism growth, creating tension as the city is perceived to overemphasize tourism at the cost of not providing enough support for other sectors in the economy. And related to all this is where we're seeing growth in the county. So again, we're going to assume we're seeing it in Goleta is at the higher wage job level, which can be good, but also at the lower wage job level. What means is, like a lot of communities, Goleta would not be the only one. There's kind of a lack of what we call accessible middle wage jobs where you don't necessarily need an advanced degree, but still pay a living kind of livable wage. So we're seeing kind of that donating out of the economy here in Santa Barbara County, and very likely in Goleta. Theme 8 is residents are worried that Goleta's growth will impact their quality of life and change the city's unique character. Survey respondents feel that growth is impacting resident quality of life and are worried about its identity, a potential barrier to economic development activities. Currently, residents are very hesitant to support residential, commercial, or industrial growth, while the economic development business community is a bit more receptive. So you can see kind of those scores here. None of them are particularly high, to be quite honest. So 3 is still kind of a very neutral score. For us to see kind of significant traction, we'd like to see that more at like 4 or higher. But this gives a sense of kind of where residents land, as well as economic development and business stakeholders. When we interviewed and did focus groups, we heard that participants also expressed value in keeping the small town feel of Goleta intact. So as it looks for opportunities to grow, that is important to many folks. And the lack of resident amenities, such as local places to shop, eat, and find entertainment is also reducing the appeal that Goleta has to the local community as well. And then finally, survey respondents are very keen to see an increase in livable wage jobs to provide financial means for residents to maintain their quality of life amidst rising prices and a housing shortage. Theme number 9, the University of California, or UCSB, has the potential to be a major economic driver. It already is, but has the potential to be even more so, and should be further leveraged to help grow the local economy beyond the tourism industry and its impact on hotel occupancy. There is evidence that a good portion, I think Matthew kind of covered this already, that maybe a good portion of Goleta's tourism is really just a byproduct of its proximity to Santa Barbara. People either visiting the city or visiting family or doing business with UCSB. A significant number of interview and focus group participants are seeking closer connection to UCSB and see the university as a major economic development driver for Goleta, particularly as it relates to access to skilled workers. That's been highlighted as a concern on previous slides, and investments in local innovation and research and development. And despite having the university nearby, Goleta's economic development stakeholders are still finding it a challenge to recruit skilled workers and find resources, again, to support kind of the innovation economy. And finally, stakeholders indicate that Goleta's proximity to UCSB is particularly advantageous to growing a robust high-tech industry if the relationship is cultivated effectively. Here you can just see economic drivers. We're highlighting 2 kind of related to this theme: availability of skilled workers and talent, and resources to support innovation and research and development. We also talked a bit about amenities as well. And finally, theme 10 is the city's economic development strategy should continue to prioritize historically disadvantaged communities to ensure equitable growth and shared prosperity. Survey respondents would like to see Goleta make more effort to address economic disparities, encourage shared prosperity regardless of socioeconomic status or demographics, and support entrepreneurs and business owners from historically disadvantaged backgrounds. Here is some of the survey results in particular. You can see those last 3 around Goleta as a community that authentically seeks to address economic disparities. Goleta's economic development priorities are designed to encourage shared prosperity, and Goleta effectively supports entrepreneurs and business owners from historically disadvantaged communities, all rating relatively low on this scale. Words such as inclusive and equitable were used by survey respondents to describe their ideal economic vision for Goleta as we look forward. And survey respondents identified inequitable growth and persistent disparities as a challenge to local economic development. And finally, the Hispanic and Latinx community, and the respondents, at least from the survey, rated the quality of Goleta's economic development drivers lower overall, with an especially large gap for broadband access, available arts and cultural amenities, access to capital for business, and job opportunities with livable wages. So with that, I think that's, again, a really quick summary of the 10 themes. We will be using these themes in kind of our early work when we get to the next phase in the planning sessions. We have sessions designed around particularly having further discussions around these insights and these themes and the data we're seeing to help drive us towards the right initiatives and strategies later along in the process. So with that, I think we'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Questions from council? Councilmember Kiriakou.
I almost don't know where to begin.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
You know, the words that come to mind when I think of what is almost a community report card from the business community, it's I don't want to say it's a failing grade, but it's a D. It's not the kind of feedback we want to get from our community. And I think I think, at least speaking for myself as someone who has lived in the community a long time and wasn't always on the city council and has come onto it more recently, I think I always had this perception that, yes, there are people within the business community that are unhappy with the council or with policy or with practices. But I don't think I really realized until we got this survey back just how widespread and pervasive it was. We basically paid people to go out and ask the question, and we got the answer. And I don't think we should be afraid of the answer. I think we should really treat this feedback like a gift and then start really looking as we move into the next phase to get clear and to get going. So my first question is, one of the findings talked about what was missing for Goleta as a tourism destination and talked about necessary support structures. Can you talk a little bit about what are those necessary support structures? Because I think about things like, placemaking. Goleta doesn't have a performing arts center in Old Town. A lot of downtowns have something that will draw people down there because it's sort of a have to do, right? If you're in Goleta, you have to go and do this one thing, or you have to do the other thing. So, there's certain infrastructure. We don't have like a performing arts center. We don't have a movie theater in Old Town. What is meant by necessary support structures? Is it that kind of thing, or is it different? What are we talking about?
Yeah, I can take that one, Chris. It's those kinds of things, yes, and I would put those under the category of attractions and things to do. So events, festivals, movie theaters, performing arts, all those sorts of things that can be a visitor draw. Yes, that's part of it. It's also partly having your own destination marketing organization or destination management organization. You're currently working with Visit Santa Barbara for that. And it's also some of the infrastructure things, such as wayfinding and that sort of, and you mentioned placemaking, I would include that as well. So I think it cuts across many dimensions. Everything from there not being much of a there in terms of having a center, to some of the more administrative kinds of roles and funding and that sort of thing that would enable promotion of Goleta as a visitor destination. And I would want to add as well, be careful not to put the cart in front of the horse and promote something before it's developed. I think it's really important, probably as we get into strategy, to think about what do we need to do to get ready to be at that point when it's more of a standalone destination.
Okay. And then another question I had. So when we were looking at other communities and drawing comparisons, we looked at Santa Ynez, we looked at Solvang and Santa Maria and San Luis Obispo, and I was very happy to see that we picked San Luis Obispo for a number of reasons. But I'm curious, was there any discussion about including Buellton? Because I think about Buellton as a city that not that long ago, not that many people thought of as a destination, and there's been a shift, and they're winning League of Cities awards for what they've been doing to their gathering spaces and public art and lots of other things. Those of us that went to the League of Cities conference saw that. I'm just kind of curious, why did we look at Buellton at all and just decide not to include it as one of the ones? Was there a particular metric that kept us from choosing them?
Yeah, I can answer that, and then I'll let Chris and Matt chime in. But basically, we looked at cities that are similar to Goleta in population, in size, in demographics, and also in location near the coastline, potentially. And then we also reviewed this with the Economic Development and Revitalization Committee and got their input as well. And so Buellton was kind of lumped into some of the other cities that you mentioned that we did compare to, because they're slightly similar and slightly close in proximity. So we didn't select Buellton for those reasons.
Okay. And then, I think about there. I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between action and recognition. And I don't want this to come off as defensive from the position of the city, but I do feel like there was a point not that long ago when we were charging forward with this process, and then we held up because of the pandemic, and we pivoted to an economic recovery plan, a response plan. And we worked with NGOs, we gave money to try and support local businesses. And I really didn't see anything in the report or the responses that seemed to indicate that that had ever happened. And I don't say that to point fingers of blame at the business community, like you're not giving us the proper recognition, but really more like, does staff feel like those efforts were not effective enough or not pervasive enough or not publicized well enough? You know, we should be engaged in an ongoing dialogue with our business community and our entire community, really. Community engagements, the whole community, including the business community, right? So where did we miss the mark there, or how was the mark missed if it wasn't us missing it? Just, you know, what happened there?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and good insight to have. As you know, during that time, a lot of cities and counties and agencies were trying to figure out what to do, and we responded with council direction on what to do. And as you know, Jaime and his team, with my help, we put together that plan based off council direction, and we did a lot for the community, as you know. And one thing we didn't ask in the survey results is explicitly, you know, how do you feel about the COVID recovery plan? So I wouldn't say that the results of this plan necessarily shine a light on their insights into our trying to help them during the pandemic. I think we haven't asked them for that input. We asked them for a comprehensive look at the city of Goleta, not specifically how do you feel about the last 2 years of our support. So I think that's why that was missing.
So let me ask this next question just kind of broadly. When we undertake initiatives, particularly initiatives that are meant to take public funds and help people, help businesses, what's the feedback loop? What's the evaluation tool? How do we know whether or not those things succeeded? Because I feel like we've got, you know, without having a better understanding of who exactly took the survey, I feel like this is an indication of there was a failure point somewhere. And so I would love to have a better understanding for when we took those actions to try and assist the business community and individuals and prop these things up and help people during a time of need. You know, is there a feedback loop? Is there an evaluation tool? Is there something in the works happening with that?
Yeah, I think that's excellent input. Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kyarko, I think that's something that we could include. We haven't had that in the past. But I think that's something that the core planning team could look at. I know Chris and his team's putting together some metrics that we could actually use to measure the success of the Economic Development Strategic Plan. But I agree with you. I think this process, to me and the consultant team and staff, is positive. We felt that the input we received, this is exactly what we asked for from the community, and it's exactly what we wanted, and they provided it. And in the future, whenever we ask for input from the city of Goleta, we know that our community members are really engaged in everything we do. They will provide that input, but I think, like you mentioned, we got to provide that avenue for them to provide that input, because they're so busy with their day-to-day trying to make ends meet with their businesses. They're not gonna on their own come out and provide feedback and input unless we ask for it, and provide an avenue for them to do that. So I certainly think that that's something we can include as we move forward with the plan.
Okay, just a couple more questions related to tourism. When we're talking about, in this report, making Goleta a tourism destination, are they talking about, like, you know, someone in Goleta saying, hey, let's go to Goleta for the weekend? Or is it really more taking advantage of the larger Santa Barbara County brand, or the Santa Barbara brand, if you will, and being more of a, well, while you're there, you got to make sure you do this one thing. You go to whether it's the Lemon Festival that is happening that weekend, or whether it's you know, some other thing. We got to see the Stowe House, whatever it is. I mean, is it really more about finding a niche within a larger market that we're defining ourselves as? This is something I've talked about in the past, so this is probably not surprising anyone. Or really more like making us a destination, like, you know, capital G, Goleta.
I'll provide a short answer, and I'll let Chris and Matt chime in as well. Mayor Prodi, Councilmember Kyarko, the answer is both. Goleta is a beautiful place. We have beautiful amenities here. I think we want people to want to come to Goleta, But we also have, you know, world-class destinations nearby. And we can't deny the fact that this is a regional economic driver and a regional tourism industry. And so people are going to want to come to Goleta to stay in our nice hotels, but they'll likely go to Solvang to do some experiences up there and go out to the wine tasting rooms up in the valley and then down to Santa Barbara as well. So I think the answer to your question is really both. And I'll let Chris add in.
No, I think you nailed it. I'll let Matthew, if he wants to provide any more specifics there.
Well, I think what you identified is a bit of this. The bridge piece is to take advantage of being part of that larger Santa Barbara region tourism ecosystem and develop the amenities that become a draw in their own right, and the brand name recognition of Goleta that becomes a draw in its own right over time. So contributing towards that, but the near-term steps definitely are going to be plays within that bigger ecosystem, I think, logically.
Okay.
I would add, sorry, council member, just let me add one thing. Having Goleta be an actual destination, I think will actually drive more spend locally in your city versus just being an add-on. Hey, we're going to go to the Santa Barbara area. We're going to do wine tasting. Oh, while we're there, let's quickly go do this one attraction. I think where we see destinations where it is the attraction and they're going specifically there, we start to see more of the spend on Main Street with small businesses at the coffee shop. They're contributing to the museums, all those types of things. So I don't want to lose sight of the importance of people saying, I want to go to Goleta. That's where you're going to see more of particularly the small business spend.
Okay. Last question. So I've heard it said in the community recently, why aren't we doing things, particularly in Old Town, to, help people update their frontages, to improve the quality of their signage? What would it take for us to create something like what I guess we evidently had before? I guess we evidently had a storefront facade program at one time through the redevelopment agency. What would it take for us to do something like that again?
That's a really good question, Councilmember Kiriakou. As you know, the funds through the RDA are no longer available. It's something that we can explore with the core planning team. Certainly resources would have to be allocated, whether it's identifying some grant funds that exist for something like that, particularly in disadvantaged communities, or potentially some general funds from the city of Goleta.
Okay, that would seem to be an opportunity to accomplish multiple objectives within the context of things that are clearly being identified as pain points here. Yeah. And I also think, frankly, I think Old Town is where there's a lot of opportunity for us, and in terms of making, getting to that it factor of got to make sure you do this one thing in Goleta. Old Town might be it. I think it's going to require a lot of different things to happen, some of which are in the works in terms of some of the placemaking things we're doing, making it more walkable, more bikeable, more pedestrian friendly, all of those things. Thank you. That's plenty for me.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember Kristen.
Yeah. I guess couple of things. Let me start out with the business environment, number 6, I believe that is. And there's different ways that the business community might be affected. And let me say this, I'm not defensive about this. If there really is a problem, then there's an opportunity for us to address it. So understanding more of what the issues are is great. And if it allows us to fill in needs that we perhaps were neglecting. But having said that, I think we need to understand more. It's such a broad brush that we're hearing about this disaffection. And it's inconsistent in some ways with what we've heard before. So there are different ways that the business community, especially the small business community, can be affected. It might be a question of loans and grants, technical assistance that we don't provide except with third parties. It could be that our permitting process is too painful. It could be, I don't know what else. But one thing that struck me is you mentioned the people complaining about taxes being high and burdensome. And I'm wondering how much of the responses that you got were many of those really critical responses from cannabis retailers or cannabis entrepreneurs, because clearly we have a very different process there. And admittedly, our processes, both for permitting and taxes, are quite different than every other industry. And really, they're right. They're challenging, and the taxes are relatively high. So how much is the response that we're getting a reflection of that industry?
Sam, my colleague, can jump in, but it's not a question we asked. First off, our survey was anonymous, but we did ask respondents to kind of identify their affiliation. So we know, small people who identified as small business owners, we know kind of what their data would show versus kind of larger corporate, et cetera. But we didn't ask unless it showed up in a open-ended question whether they were a cannabis business or not. One thing I'll say, so my background's economic development. I've worked at both the state and local level, is when businesses don't, first of all, there's not a business out there that doesn't want lower costs. It's the reality of what it is. It's the reality of the dynamics of wages they need to pay to stay competitive. It's the reality of just cost of living or cost of doing business out there. So I don't think there's a business that doesn't want lower costs, that they can funnel more into their products or services. But you tend to see it particularly heightened when you don't see a lot of direct support in other ways. So council member mentioned kind of things like storefront improvement. So when there's not kind of a package, a portfolio of programs to support kind of various needs, it could be access to capital, it could be storefront, it could be workforce development. It is not uncommon for tax rates and business costs to kind of jump up. That's kind of the first thing on their mind, controlling their costs.
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, first, the storefronts, we're in a challenging, especially Old Town. One of the reasons that it didn't go further when it was offered before is that there's a separation between the people who own the property and the people who are managing and running the businesses, who own the businesses. And they, in the past, were reluctant to see improvements, the business owners in Old Town, because they were afraid that putting in those improvements would lead to higher rents. And that was what undermined the program that the city had in place before, is that they were reluctant to see improvements and so forth. So it's peculiar. And our sales tax was lower until we just passed a new sales tax increase, was lower than the rest of the state, or the county rather, by and large. And everything that I've heard is that our neighborhood services people are really, really helpful with permitting, establishing businesses and doing that, a real hand-holding kind of thing. That's not to say we're doing everything that's possible. Like I said, we don't have a robust process of providing loans or technical assistance or other sorts of things. There's certainly things that people could ask for more. But I guess where I'm going with this is, I think before we condemn ourselves as inadequate, ineffectual, I think we need to understand better where this reaction is coming from and what is the particular source. Is it the cannabis dealers who are the ones who are most unhappy? In which case we, understand why that is. Is it, what is the thing that we're lacking, or what is if there's something inadequate, it's unlikely to be the tech industries, so all I'm saying is we don't have that information now. We have this, as I gather from what you said, we have this broad paintbrush of, that there's some element that's dissatisfied. But I think before we jump, we have to understand, what the problem is more specifically. And so I would just put that on the table to make sure that we get a better sense of that before we design solutions. The other thing is, when you had highlighted before the potential for visitors and so forth and such. Can you separate and distinguish? So much of the survey that you have here is based on voluntary submissions from people, but some of it is also a random survey of the potential visitors I'm thinking of. And I would think that one, if we're talking about how to increase our visitor profile, people coming to the city and developing an identity and so forth, what we really want to be doing is focusing on that survey, not the people who are already here, who are, it's just their impression or something like that. So what are the results that you got from the potential visitor survey as far as what they're looking for, why they're not coming, et cetera?
I could take a first stab at that one. Yeah, so and just to quickly introduce myself, I'm a research analyst here at Crosby Group, having a little bit issue with my video, but that study was performed by destination analysts, and the full survey results will be included in the final situation assessment, but a few things that we found were, again, as highlighted by Chris and Matthew, the lack of name recognition among potential visitors to Goleta, lack of awareness of the key attractions in Goleta. Those are the ones that come to front of mind, but will have that full survey results available in the report.
They should be linked into the report you have. The kind of their destination analyst alone, I think, has 100 slides, which we've referenced in our report. But I think Sam hit it, is potential visitors, again, highlights. I'm sure there's more details we could go into. There's just awareness was a really big deal. Didn't know a ton about Goleta, didn't know a ton about what to do. Had definitely heard of Santa Barbara, though. Right.
Well, I mean, it's not clear to me what that competing attraction would be at this point. You had highlighted, don't put together a campaign before we have something that is, the steak. Before we have the steak, don't sell the sizzle or something. And
I might quote you on that. Good.
But yeah, so yeah, I mean, the fact that they're unaware of the key attractions in Goleta, that might not be that surprising. That they're not as pronounced right now compared to Santa Barbara and wine country and so forth. So I guess those are my questions right now. I think I think I appreciate the survey. I think it's great for us to have a roadmap to develop and, more effectively target our priorities. So thank you.
Mayor Brody, Councilmember Chiarco, if I may, I also missed a potential revenue source for a frontage signage program, and I just wanted to mention that to the council, that other opportunities exist in the form of a business improvement district.
Oh, I remember when that topic came up. That was a while ago. Councilmember Richards.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate this report, and thank you for those who have been involved in this. And, as Councilmember Kyriakou said, it is kind of a, not a very good report card if you want to view it as that. But I also view it as an opportunity for us to get feedback about areas that we can be improving and areas that we should be focusing on. So I view it as an opportunity as well. I think part of what my question is, just some observations. I think I can get some questions in here, but a lot of just issues that are popping up for me that I want to make sure that we touch on. I think one of the things that isn't clear to me is how much the issue of perception comes into this. I think maybe Councilmember Kyriakou or Kasdan was talking about that as well. But, is it that we don't have these things, or that the business community is there were some comments about taxes, et cetera. And is it, I guess I want to delve deeper into those things. And maybe that's what the next part of this project will do in terms of the getting focused part. But I think, how much, there's, for any of these issues, I want to ask more questions about, okay, well, why do they think that? Or what is the issue behind that? Are our taxes higher? That was one of the things, and I thought it was interesting, okay, are we talking about cannabis taxes? Are we talking about sales taxes? Or are we talking about property taxes? And what is that being compared against? And I understand that these were just surveys, and so you didn't have a lot of opportunity to ask follow-up questions. But I'm hoping that for some of these, that we can delve more deeply into what the underlying issues are and kind of dig a little deeper. For example, the issue of tourism, it struck me that there seemed to be some competing feedback about tourism. And I think on the one hand, there was a comment in there that we put too much emphasis on tourism, and then there seemed to be another competing view that we're not doing enough to either attract tourism or to make use of the tourists that are already here. So I think maybe that's a false dichotomy that doesn't really need to exist. I think there might be some concern from residents that we value tourism over the needs of our own residents, and I think that there's a lot of things that we can focus on that will make life better for our residents and at the same time be good for tourists and attract tourists. There's also the issue of tourists when we think about visitors in general. Some of our tourists that are coming here are UCSB related. They could be parents coming for graduation weekend, for parents weekend, et cetera. They could be Goleta businesses. We have there's the Santa Barbara Airport and a lot of traffic coming through there, some of which is business traffic and corporations that are maybe headquartered here in Goleta. So these are maybe they're not people coming to Goleta because Goleta is a tourist destination, but they may be coming anyway. And I think that we can talk about how to keep people here. If they're already visiting, how do we make it worth their while to stay another day or stay a couple days? Have more opportunity, have more incentive, have more, things for them to do and see while they're here. Maybe they're not coming out of their way just to come to Goleta, but maybe they'll stay a little bit extra, contribute to our economy while they're here. So that would be something that I would hope that our next phase of this is going to look at. I guess I wanted to just ask that in terms of a question with regard to that discrepancy that I'm seeing in terms of the disconnect between whether we do too much emphasis on tourism versus not enough. Because I saw both of those comments in there, and I'm wondering if somebody can speak to that and provide some feedback about what we're hearing about that.
Chris or Matthew, do you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I'm curious, where you saw that feedback, was it in the quotes? The stakeholder quotes?
Yeah, I can find the quote, but it was something that was in the presentation. Which part? That we're not doing enough or that we're doing too much?
Well, both. I suspect are from the quotes, and I think that just goes to show that opinion isn't completely aligned within the community. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we include quotes that go a little bit of both sides, but we do pull out in the themes what we saw as the predominant sentiment. So I think the sentiment that there's a lot of room to grow on the tourism front is probably what wins out, even though there are some dissenting voices, is how I would characterize that. Chris, would you add any color commentary to that?
No, and I think the comment about, first of all, tourism is a big driver of your economy. It does drive revenue into the city pretty significantly. So I don't want to paint the picture that it's not a big part of your economy and it's being overemphasized. I think where it plays into when you think around tourism strategy and branding and marketing, there's just some foundational stuff that likely needs to be focused on first before you can really promote Goleta as a destination. Doesn't mean you're not benefiting from tourism, like families visiting their students at UCSB or things like that.
And Mayor Pro Tem Richards, I would just add that this is a community-driven plan, just like we do with everything else in the city of Goleta. We want this to be the community's plan. And one of the things that we struggle with that is those competing views that you're seeing. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for the development of this plan, is finding that balance for the community so that we can get that consensus to move forward in a particular direction with that balance. Because like I said, this is a community plan. We want this plan to be for everyone, not some and not the few, not, for everyone. So, and that's related to other issues that we'll see, especially the airport. That's a community, that is a economic driver of our community. We cannot deny that, but it also is having major impacts. And there's some people that don't want it to be an economic driver. So it's finding that balance for what fits right for Goleta and for all of Goleta. And that's going to be the challenge.
Okay, yeah, and I'll just highlight a few of the other issues for me that's kind of stuck out was with regard to businesses, and in particular small businesses. I think it was called out, especially those from historically disadvantaged communities. So, I would hope that our next phase, as we're getting focused, can zero in on what kinds of things that we can do to better support our small businesses from those historically disadvantaged communities. With regard to the connections to UCSB, and high-tech businesses. We have a Goleta entrepreneurial magnet, and we also participate in the REACH Central Coast Regional Economic Action Coalition to look at encouraging more high-tech and space industry in our city. So, I guess it would be, given what we're already doing, what more could we be doing? I guess that would be the question. The placemaking in Old Town. I'm intrigued by that, and I know there is already stuff that we're doing. We're also about to engage in an Old Town visioning process, so I would hope that maybe we can coordinate, and maybe some ideas will come out of that about things that we can focus on in Old Town in particular. And yeah, I think those were just some of the comments and some of the issues for me that stuck out. So thank you.
Councilmember Reyes-Martin.
Thank you. I'll just give some real brief comments. I really appreciate being able to come in and get to have this presentation on my first night. I think this assessment is very holistic, and what I really appreciate is that it is a broader interpretation of economic development. As a millennial, as the millennial of this council, some of the things that really stand out to me and that I have heard from my peers that are residents in this community who may have attended UCSB and are trying to stay here and build a life here. Retention of employees, having diverse options of high-wage jobs, options for housing that's affordable, arts and culture, all of those things I really appreciate are threaded, throughout this assessment. And I'd also add that I think our schools, our elementary schools, are economic drivers in this community. So I feel like I had to add that as a former Goleta school board member. So I really appreciate this assessment. I look forward to the continued work on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Reyes-Martin.
Well, I'll be brief. A lot of my questions have been asked already. I will be honest and say that when I first read this report, and first of all, thank you very much for it, the report. It was hard not to be defensive, to be honest. You want to hear that your businesses are happy with how things are going. So I was disappointed to hear that. I don't know if there was something I missed in this report that actually gave examples of what were they really unhappy about. I mean, could you give us working with the city on their, licensing or permitting or, all the details of why they're not happy with what's going on. So, I think, and then I took a step back and said, well, it's true. We do have an opportunity now to take a look at what's going on and dig deeper. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. Of course, we want to hear from our businesses and from our residents. And I think you hit it right on, Mr. Kintz, is that balance. It's always going to be a struggle to find that balance. And what does make Goleta really unique. and want people to be able to live here and afford to live here. So there's a lot of dynamics going on, and they've all been pretty much listed, so I'm not going to go. I had many of the same. So what I'd like to do is open it up to the public and see if there's speakers that would like to speak to it at this point.
If any member of the public on the Zoom webinar would like to speak to this item, please use the raised hand icon and I will call on you. I do have an in-person speaker slip for Kristen Miller, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor Perotti and members of the council. I'm Kristen Miller, President and CEO of the Santa Barbara South Coast Chamber of Commerce from Goleta to Carpinteria. The Chamber has been following the progress of the city's economic development strategic plan closely and would like to thank the Coraggio Group, city staff, and the Economic Development and Revitalization Committee for their work so far. The Chamber is supportive of the key themes which emerged as areas of focus for further development of the Economic Development Strategic Plan. However, we're going to highlight tonight a few themes of particular interest to the Chamber and the business community. We've long been a supporter of further addressing the availability and affordability of housing and childcare in our community, highlighted in Theme 2. The Chamber also wholly supports Theme 4. A focus on placemaking in Old Town Goleta has always been a critical step in addressing Goleta's economic development needs. While the city has begun to address this with the Hollister restriping project, as well as previous work with complete streets and other infrastructure projects, it should be emphasized as an important aspect of future economic development. Theme 5 outlines a need to address Goleta's position as a visitor destination, and the profile study, as talked about tonight, shows 3 in 10 visitors to Goleta report that Goleta is their primary destination, but 93% of visitors are highly satisfied with their experience. So we just need to increase that number. This highlights a clear opportunity for continued improvement regarding Goleta's brand as a visitor destination. The Chamber continues to be a willing partner in visitor services and is happy to engage in further discussions on how Economic Development Strategic Plan could support these next steps. Theme 7 touches on a need to for further industry diversification, which could be accomplished through partnerships with and further support of our growing local high-tech manufacturing and healthcare industries. This connects to Theme 9, which emphasizes increased collaboration with UC Santa Barbara. The university has a potential to be a major economic driver and resource for the city, and this should be utilized. Our reputation as the infrared capital of the world, our growing high-tech manufacturing industry, and our proximity to UCSB are all significant opportunities for the city to capitalize on regarding economic development, and the Chamber hopes to see them represented in the development of the plan. Thank you for your commitment to a well-thought-out economic development strategic plan for the city of Goleta, and we look forward to partnering with you in the core planning group going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no further speakers, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Kyriakou?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just moving into comments and deliberation, I think there's a lot of good lessons here, and there's a lot that really is sort of food for thought and kind of begs more questions. There's lots of other cities out there that work with their business communities, their small business communities, their larger businesses. So what are the takeaways that other places are doing that are working there that we can model here? Are there regularized meetings between our staff and the business community that could be happening that aren't? Are there things that perhaps council members were moving into districts, perhaps council members and their districts can take responsibility and ownership for having more outreach directly to the businesses in their districts so that we're a little bit closer to people. I do have to say, I did see some specifics, to the mayor's point about trying to get underneath, what's driving this and the taxes and the fees and everything. One example that stood out for me in the report was the discussion about the business license fee and the fact that it had essentially doubled. And I had to actually go back and ask staff, when exactly did that happen? And they came back to me with the data, and I appreciated that. And I think it begs a question that we should really think about. And it really goes to the value proposition of cost recovery for government services versus what are you trying to accomplish in the bigger picture as a city, right? So it came up earlier, we waive development impact fees for things that we call beneficial projects, right? That's something that we do that not a lot of other cities do or did. That was a pretty innovative thing. We said, hey, if you're providing affordable housing, if you're providing childcare, if you're doing affordable, smaller sized accessory dwelling units, we're going to waive your fees, right? So we're setting aside a cost to someone to do something because we get a benefit. And I have to ask, is this report telling us that we should be less focused on cost recovery when it comes to some of our fees for regular everyday businesses? Perhaps we should look at a pilot program where we do 1 year where we do a break on business license fees, or I'm kind of spitballing here off the top of my head, but are there things like that we should be thinking about? Are there fee structures? Are there more outcome-oriented solutions that we could be looking at? Could we, one thing I've heard discussed in the community is, could you do a sort of a this for that type of approach when it comes to processing? If you meet these certain conditions, we will guarantee you we will get an answer or a process completion within a certain set period of time. That would create incentives for people to come here. Hey, I'm getting certainty. Certainty has a value proposition. If you're trying to get your business license, can you be assured that if you do a certain amount of steps within a certain period of time, we'll get you your business license within 30 days or whatever it is. These are the kinds of conversations I think we have to have with our business community, where we should be proactive, we should be thoughtful. We shouldn't be worried about the feedback and the answer. To me, this kind of feedback is a gift. I think that we really need to treat it like the gift that it is. I'm reminded of how I felt when I saw the feedback from the community about the Goleta Community Center, right? There's a real nexus for me and a kind of an aha moment. When we saw the feedback from hundreds of community members about the Goleta Community Center, that they weren't clear on how the processes were supposed to work, and it seemed like the prices were different for different people, and all these different things. It really made me take a step back, and I think it made this whole council take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, we need to reevaluate this, and we need to step up and take responsibility and accountability for our community center, which we eventually did. What we didn't do is parse that feedback and, well, was it only coming from like the pickleball people or only coming from the people in the senior program? We didn't try and slice it and dice it in order to get a more exacting, clear set of data so that we could be more certain that the feedback was valid and the feedback applied. We accepted the feedback as the gift that it was, and then we took decisive action. And I think we should do the same thing with this survey. We should take it as the gift that it is, recognize that it doesn't mean we're bad people, it doesn't mean we're anti-business, it means there's opportunities for us to do better. And I think as we move forward with this process, we should be extending olive branches and doing a lot of listening. So that I'll just leave it at that.
Councilmember Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, before we propose solutions with respect to the business, let's understand, is it coming from the very small businesses? Where is the issue? Is it the cannabis folks? And get a better sense of it. So, and then devise solutions, I would think. As far as tourism, a couple of other observations. As far as tourism, I think we have to recognize right now our hotels are relatively full. It's certainly, there might be seasonal opportunities, and that would be something that then we want to think about what sort of things are going to add tourists during those times when it's a little lower. But there's really a capacity issue, and so unless we're talking about building new hotels, we're pretty full with our hotels, and so our strategy should be to consider what are we doing given the hotel capacity essentially that we have, and what is it that we're trying, when are we trying to build it? But the other tourism thing, so that's the TOT aspect side of it. The other part of it is on the sales tax side. And there could be ways of recruiting, let's say, more UCSB students or IV people to come to Old Town, to come to Calle Real, et cetera, and rather than go to Santa Barbara. So, the attractions don't necessarily have to be an attraction that is somebody who's living in, 100 miles away or something and is thinking of staying over. There are attractions that are going to spur sales tax development in the area. And that leads me to the third observation with tourism, and that's that straddle that everyone has referred to, that in which tourism isn't necessarily an end in itself. It's a way of benefiting the community. It's bringing in people to benefit. And a lot of what we want to do in our straddle is to benefit those who need it most. It's how are we going to get tourism to benefit those small businesses, the nascent, the developing, and all of that? How do we help those who don't now benefit from it? And tourism is a mixed thing. I know in Western Goleta, when the Monarchs were big, a lot of the people in the area didn't like seeing buses of tourists coming in to go tromp through the Elwood Mesa area, the Grove. It was not appreciated, especially. So we have to approach that slightly gingerly. Just a few other observations only. That diversification on the county level may be an idea, but on the city level, to me, it shouldn't be a goal. That we should put, as I think Chris or Matthew said, we should be, what is our strength? There is an advantage to having clusters. There is a natural advantages that we have and that are going to benefit the city more than other things. So putting in sort of low, things that don't produce a lot of benefits to the city just to have diversification isn't going to help us particularly. One could argue it's beneficial on a county level to have all these pieces that will help, but our city's too small to talk about really focusing on diversification. And I would add that if anyone's thinking in terms of diversification as a way of ensuring our revenues are stable in downturns and so forth, I think our couple of recessions have shown we're fairly stable. Having UCSB there and having other sources, our TOT does dip, but it's not as bad as one would think. That we've maintained our income pretty well generally, and but I think it's a good report, and it's aside from gathering more detail and more information, it does show. And just my last thoughts about how we have these competing interests, that a lot of these things are not either or. And tourism is one of those things where we've got the small businesses and communities and some people who are affected as less enthusiastic than others. Housing is another one where we have obviously mutually exclusive goals in some ways between those who are advocating for the increased housing and so forth, while concurrently also a strong push to maintain community character and avoid having the city change significantly. And I'm not, that's not a flaw of the report. People want both. And it'll be a challenge for the report, and it'll be a challenge for the city to try and navigate between those competing goals. But I appreciate the report, and I think it's a great stepping stone or stepping off point. It's valuable for us to know where to go, and this will give us a foundation about where to invest and how to benefit the city best in terms of our development strategy. So thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions or comments. And this is no motion required, and I think we gave you some feedback, and thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Mayor Perotti and council members. Good evening.
I'm sorry, can I make one more comment?
Sure, absolutely.
Just since we're giving feedback, just a couple of things to think about going forward in terms of, I guess, food for thought or ideas. One of them came up tonight with the young women that we recognized. They they saw a need in the community and they just literally went out and created something, right? They created a maker's market. So things that we can think about for, I'll just give Old Town as an example. You know, can Old Town have a farmer's market? Could Old Town have a maker's market? Could we do it on Hollister? If no, for safety or other reasons, could we do it in the parking lot at the community center? We have that beautiful grass field in the parking lot. These are the kinds of things that I think could we, have a monthly, quarterly film festival in Old Town where you do something, we have to start getting creative, and we have to start getting intentional and not just waiting for people to come up with an idea and not only bring it to us, but then be willing to be as patient as is required to go through whatever they need to go through to be able to make it happen. And so I think we need to be very curious, we need to be very intentional, and be looking for those kinds of opportunities. That's my final feedback. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.